Africa spent decades framed as a problem to contain rather than a prize to understand. That story is collapsing. Beneath familiar headlines about poverty and instability, a quieter transformation has been advancing, measured not in speeches, but in data streams quietly tracked by global capitals. The continent now holds the youngest population on Earth, the fastest rate of urban expansion, and mineral deposits that modern economies cannot function without. Those facts reshaped how power centers think. Africa controls roughly a third of the world's critical minerals, the inputs behind batteries, defense systems, and digital infrastructure. Its population is projected to double by 2050, forming the largest labor force the global economy has ever seen. Entire financial systems have skipped legacy stages, moving directly into mobile payments, digital identity, and decentralized markets. This awakening did not announce itself. It arrived through spreadsheets, satellite images, and classified assessments circulating through Washington, Beijing, and Brussels. Analysts like Michael Grant began to grasp a simple truth. Whoever influences Africa's next 2 decades quietly influences the global economy for half a century. Africa is no longer waiting to be discovered. It is waiting to be claimed. And once that realization settles in, competition stops being theoretical and starts becoming urgent. The stakes rise quietly now. Cliffhanger: if Africa is waking up, the question is not who will arrive, but who already has. Officially, no nation calls it a scramble. Unofficially, it looks exactly like one. Across Africa, infrastructure deals, security partnerships, debt arrangements, and trade corridors are being mapped with deliberate precision. Each agreement quiet, technical, and strategically timed. Ports rise where shipping lanes matter. Railways appear where minerals move. Power plants follow contracts, not speeches, and every project leaves a footprint that lasts longer than any summit. China finances ports, railways, and power grids that secure access decades ahead. Russia expands security contracts that translate protection into political leverage. The United States adjusts its posture, shifting from aid, heavy optics toward investment designed to influence outcomes, rather than headlines. None of it is framed as competition, yet every move is calibrated against rivals watching the same maps. For planners like Daniel Brooks, the implication is unmistakable. Africa is becoming the testing ground where power is exercised without armies crossing borders. Control no longer requires occupation, it requires leverage. Debt shapes dependency. Security arrangements create loyalty. Technology establishes alignment, often before citizens realize choices were made. This is not the colonial scramble of textbooks. It is wrapped in partnerships, development banks, and memorandums that sound cooperative while locking in influence. Whoever builds the roads directs trade. Whoever funds the grids determines growth. The race stays quiet because noise. Africa's greatest strength has become its most dangerous vulnerability scale. Growth is arriving faster than governance can synchronize, creating friction that spreads quietly before it explodes. Cities expand upward and outward without infrastructure keeping pace, while millions of young people enter labor markets that cannot absorb them yet. Capital pours in unevenly, testing institutions that were never designed to manage speed at this magnitude. Strategists like Rebecca Lawson noticed something new. Instability no longer stays local. A disrupted mining corridor interrupts global manufacturing timelines. Political uncertainty in one region moves energy prices elsewhere. Currency markets react not to wars, but to whispers of reform failure. Africa's internal stresses now transmit outward, turning domestic challenges into global pressure points. This is why Africa matters differently today. Its economies are too connected, its resources too central, to be treated as isolated cases. Stability has shifted from a moral objective to an economic requirement. Every policy misstep echoes beyond borders, and every delayed reform compounds risk. Yet efforts to stabilize often deepen the problem. External influence sharpens internal divisions, forcing leaders to balance domestic legitimacy against foreign expectations. Africa is not fragile because it is weak. It is fragile because it is powerful, unfinished, and carrying global attention. Cliffhanger. And as the pressure tightens, something far larger begins to surface beneath the strain. By 2035, Africa's combined consumer and industrial markets are projected to exceed $3 trillion, and that figure no longer lives in forecasts alone. Factories are relocating as labor costs squeeze Asia, fintech platforms scale at unmatched speed, and the global energy transition leans heavily on African resources that cannot be substituted elsewhere. What once looked like distant potential is crystallizing into contracts, supply chains, and irreversible commitments. For investors like Jonathan Reed, Africa is the last underpriced continent, not because risks are hidden, but because they are mispriced. Volatility is obvious. Governance gaps are documented, yet the upside remains structurally underestimated. Every major power now understands the same equation: ignore Africa and surrender the next century's growth. Secure influence here and global economic gravity shifts quietly, but permanently. This urgency explains the intensity. Elections attract foreign attention. Military partnerships multiply. Development banks rush approvals before rivals do. Capital flows not out of generosity, but out of fear of missing position. Africa is not emerging on a gentle curve. It is accelerating, compressing decades of change into years and forcing decisions faster than institutions can comfortably absorb. Cliffhanger. But acceleration forces a choice that will decide who writes Africa's future. Africa now stands at a crossroads no previous generation faced. For the first time, the continent holds leverage in a world that suddenly needs it. Multiple powers arrive with competing offers, each framed as partnership, each carrying expectations. Strategic importance is no longer debated. It is assumed, calculated, and priced into global decisions. The outcome depends on coordination or fragmentation. Growth can strengthen institutions or overwhelm them before they mature. Observers like Thomas Hale describe this moment as unusually fluid, where outcomes are not predetermined. Africa could become the engine of global growth, channeling labor, resources, and innovation into sustained influence. It could also become an arena where external rivalries extract value while leaving instability behind. Or it could chart a third path, emerging as a power center that negotiates on its own terms. The battleground is not territory, but alignment. Influence is earned through consent, not conquest. The next world order will not be decided only in Washington, Beijing, or Brussels. It will be shaped by how African leaders manage attention they can no longer deflect. The $3 trillion shift is already moving. What remains uncertain is who shapes it deliberately, and who miscalculates Africa at this moment.